Now, most Americans are familiar with DA Willis due to her high-profile investigation into alleged attempts to overturn the 2020 election results in Georgia. That case has been a political lightning rod, attracting intense scrutiny from all sides. But today, the spotlight is on a different legal battle, one that raises fundamental questions about government transparency and the public's right to know. A Fulton County Superior Court judge, Rachel Krause, has delivered a sharp rebuke to District Attorney Willis, finding that her office violated Georgia's Open Records Act. This isn't just a slap on the wrist. The judge has ordered Willis to personally pay over $54,000 in attorney's fees to the individual who brought the lawsuit, attorney Ashley Merchant. Furthermore, the judge has mandated that Willis's office finally turn over the public records that were initially requested. This ruling stems from a lawsuit filed by Merchant back in January 2024. Merchant, who represents Michael Roman, one of the co-defendants in the election interference case, alleged that the district attorney's office had repeatedly failed to comply with her requests for public documents. These weren't frivolous requests. They sought information that any member of the public, and certainly a legal representative involved in a related case, would have a legitimate interest in. What kind of records was Merchant seeking? According to court filings, she was looking for reports provided to Willis's office by companies that were hired to track the media impact of Willis's public statements and gauge public opinion on them. This is a fascinating detail. Why would a district attorney's office need to track its own media coverage and public perception, especially around the time they were seeking to indict a former president and his allies? It raises questions about the motivations behind such expenditures and whether public funds were being used appropriately. Beyond the media tracking reports, Merchant also requested a copy of the non-disclosure or confidentiality agreement that employees in the district attorney's office are required to sign. Understanding the terms of such agreements is crucial for transparency and accountability within any public institution. Finally, she sought a list of the attorneys that Fani Willis had hired. This is basic information about the staffing and structure of a public office, something the public has a right to know. Judge Krause's ruling was unequivocal. She didn't mince words, stating that the failures of Willis's office to comply with the Open Records law were intentional, not done in good faith, and were substantially groundless and vexatious. These are strong terms for a judge to use against a top legal official. The judge further found that Willis and her office lacked substantial justification for their non-compliance, thus justifying the order for the payment of Merchant's attorney's fees. The timeline here is important. Merchant filed her lawsuit in January of last year, and the judge's order came down just recently. This indicates a prolonged period of resistance from the district attorney's office. Merchant herself stated that she filed the lawsuit as a last resort after her repeated attempts to obtain the documents were ignored. She described the office as openly hostile and testified that her requests were handled differently compared to others. Adding to this troubling picture, the Open Records officer for the district attorney's office, Dexter Bond, admitted during a hearing that he refused to communicate by phone with Merchant, even though it was his regular practice to call requesters if a request was unclear. This kind of differential treatment based on who is making the request certainly suggests a lack of good faith, as Judge Krause noted in her order. Treating a lawyer involved in a highly significant case differently when they are seeking public information raises serious concerns about potential obstruction and a lack of transparency. Now, let's delve deeper into why these specific records were being sought and what their potential significance might be. Ashley Merchant, as the attorney for Michael Roman, one of the defendants in the election interference case, has a vested interest in understanding the strategies and potential biases of the prosecution. The media tracking reports, for instance, could shed light on whether the district attorney's office was actively trying to shape public opinion or respond to criticism in ways that might influence the ongoing investigation or future jury pool. Think about it. If a prosecutor's office is spending public resources to monitor its media coverage and public image related to a specific case, it raises questions about their priorities. Is the focus solely on pursuing justice, or is there also a concern about public relations and managing the narrative? While it's natural for any public figure to be aware of their public image, the extent to which a prosecutor's office actively tracks and analyzes this data, especially in a politically charged case, warrants scrutiny. Furthermore, the non-disclosure agreements within the district attorney's office are also a matter of public interest. Understanding the scope and limitations of these agreements is crucial for ensuring that employees are free to raise legitimate concerns or report potential misconduct without fear of reprisal. Overly broad or restrictive NDAs can stifle transparency and accountability within a public institution. The public has a right to know the rules governing the conduct and speech of those who are entrusted with upholding the law. The list of attorneys hired by Fani Willis is perhaps the most straightforward request, yet its denial speaks volumes about the office's approach to transparency. Basic information about who is working in a public office and being paid with taxpayer money should be readily available. Refusal to provide such a list can breed suspicion and undermine public trust. The legal basis for open records laws like Georgia's is rooted in the fundamental principle of government accountability. In a democracy, the public is sovereign and they have a right to access information about the workings of their government. This access allows citizens and the press to hold public officials accountable for their actions and decisions. When public agencies, especially those wielding significant power like a district attorney's office, resist providing information, it erodes this crucial foundation of trust and accountability. Judge Krause's ruling underscores the importance of these open records laws and the willingness of the judiciary to enforce them, even against powerful figures. The fact that she ordered Fani Willis to personally pay the attorney's fees is particularly noteworthy. This suggests that the judge believed Willis's actions went beyond mere negligence or bureaucratic oversight and indicated a more deliberate disregard for the law. Typically, legal fees against a public agency are paid from public funds. Holding an individual official personally responsible sends a strong message about the importance of compliance with transparency laws. This case also highlights the potential conflicts that can arise when a prosecutor becomes a subject of intense public and political scrutiny. The pressure and criticism that come with high-profile cases can understandably lead to a defensive posture. However, this defensiveness should not translate into a disregard for fundamental principles of transparency and the public's right to information. In fact, in such high-stakes situations, maintaining transparency is even more critical to ensuring public trust in the integrity of the legal process. The implications of this ruling extend beyond just the specific records requested by Ashley Merchant. It sets a precedent for how the Fulton County District Attorney's Office, and potentially other public agencies in Georgia, must handle open records requests in the future. It sends a clear message that stonewalling legitimate requests for public information will not be tolerated by the courts. Moreover, this development adds another layer of complexity to the ongoing scrutiny surrounding Fani Willis and her handling of the election interference case. While this ruling is specifically about open records, it inevitably feeds into the broader narrative of transparency and accountability within her office. Critics of the election interference investigation may seize upon this ruling as further evidence of alleged misconduct or a lack of transparency in her operations. Supporters, on the other hand, might argue that this is a separate issue and should not detract from the merits of the election case. Regardless of one's perspective on the election interference case, the violation of open records law is a serious matter that deserves attention. It speaks to the fundamental principles of government transparency and the public's right to know. As American viewers, understanding these nuances is crucial for a well-informed understanding of the legal and political landscape. These laws typically outline what types of records are considered public, the procedures for requesting them, and the grounds under which agencies can withhold information. Common exemptions often include matters of national security, ongoing criminal investigations, and personal privacy. However, the burden is generally on the government agency to justify why a particular record should not be released. Georgia's Open Records Act, like similar laws in other states, aims to promote transparency and public access to government documents. The recent ruling against DA Willis suggests that Judge Krause found her office's justifications for withholding the requested records to be unconvincing and not in line with the spirit and letter of the law. The fact that Ashley Merchant had to resort to filing a lawsuit to obtain these records is itself telling. Open records requests are intended to be a relatively straightforward process. Agencies are typically required to respond within a reasonable timeframe, either providing the documents or explaining why they cannot be released under specific exemptions. The implication here is that Willis's office was either unresponsive or provided inadequate justifications for their refusal to comply. The judge's characterization of the office's actions as intentional, not done in good faith, and were substantially groundless and vexatious paints a picture of deliberate obstruction rather than mere bureaucratic delay or misunderstanding of the law. This is a serious indictment of a public official whose job it is to uphold the law. Now, let's consider the potential motivations behind the district attorney's office's reluctance to release these specific records. Regarding the media tracking reports, perhaps the office was concerned that releasing them would reveal the extent to which public resources were being used for public relations purposes rather than strictly legal work. It could also potentially expose the strategies they were using to shape public perception of their investigations. In a highly politicized case like the election interference investigation, the optics of a prosecutor's office actively monitoring and responding to media coverage could be problematic. As for the non-disclosure agreements, there might have been concerns about revealing the specific terms and conditions that employees are bound by. However, the public has a legitimate interest in knowing the extent to which public employees are restricted in their ability to speak about their work, especially in an office as powerful and politically sensitive as the district attorney's. Overly restrictive NDAs can hinder whistleblowing and make it more difficult to uncover potential misconduct. The refusal to provide a list of hired attorneys is perhaps the most puzzling. This is basic information about the staffing of a public office. Withholding such a list could suggest an attempt to obscure who is working on specific cases or how public funds are being allocated for legal personnel. Transparency in staffing is essential for public accountability. It's important to note that this ruling comes at a time when Fani Willis is already facing significant scrutiny and criticism related to her handling of the election interference case, including allegations of an improper relationship with a special prosecutor she hired. While this open records violation is a separate legal matter, it contributes to a narrative of a lack of transparency and potential ethical concerns surrounding her leadership. The legal battle over these open records may not be over. It's possible that Fani Willis could appeal Judge Krause's ruling. However, the strong language used by the judge suggests that any appeal would face a significant hurdle. Furthermore, the negative publicity generated by this finding of a violation of open records law is likely to have a lasting impact on public perception of the district attorney's office. For American viewers, this story serves as a reminder of the importance of government transparency at all levels. Whether it's a local district attorney's office or a federal agency, the public has a right to access information about how these institutions operate and how taxpayer money is being spent. Open records laws are a crucial tool for ensuring accountability and preventing abuse of power. This case also highlights the crucial role of the judiciary in upholding these principles of transparency. Judge Krause's willingness to hold a powerful public official accountable for violating the law underscores the importance of an independent judiciary in safeguarding democratic values. As this story continues to develop, we will be watching closely to see how Fani Willis responds to the ruling and whether the requested records are ultimately released to the public. The implications of this case extend beyond just Fulton County, serving as a cautionary tale for all public officials about the importance of adhering to open records laws and respecting the public's right to know. Firstly, the financial penalty, while perhaps not crippling for a large office, is a tangible consequence of the court's finding. The fact that Willis is personally responsible for these fees sends a strong message, as we discussed earlier, about individual accountability for upholding the law, even when acting in an official capacity. This could potentially lead to closer scrutiny of the office's spending and administrative practices in the future. Secondly, the release of the requested documents could reveal information that Ashley Merchant and potentially other interested parties might find significant. The media tracking reports could offer insights into the office's communication strategies and resource allocation. The non-disclosure agreements could shed light on internal regulations and potential limitations on employee speech. And the list of hired attorneys provides basic transparency about the office's personnel. The information contained within these documents could potentially be used in ongoing legal proceedings or simply inform public understanding of the district attorney's operations. Furthermore, this ruling could embolden other individuals or organizations to file open records requests with the Fulton County District Attorney's Office, knowing that the courts are willing to enforce compliance. This increased scrutiny could lead to greater transparency in the long run, even if it creates more administrative burden for the office. The political ramifications of this ruling should also not be underestimated. Fani Willis has become a highly polarizing figure due to her prosecution of Donald Trump and his allies. Critics of that investigation are likely to seize upon this finding of an open records violation as further evidence of what they perceive as overreach or a lack of transparency in her conduct. This could fuel further attacks on her credibility and the legitimacy of the election interference case. Conversely, supporters of Willis might argue that this is a separate and relatively minor issue compared to the gravity of the election interference charges. They might portray it as a tactical move by the defense to undermine the prosecution. However, even for supporters, the judge's strong language regarding the intentional and bad faith nature of the non-compliance will likely be a cause for concern. The legal community in Georgia will also be closely watching the fallout from this ruling. Judges generally hold a high regard for the rule of law and the importance of government transparency. A finding that a fellow member of the legal profession, especially one in a position of public trust like a district attorney, has intentionally violated the law is likely to be viewed with disapproval by many. This could potentially impact Willis's relationships within the legal community and her overall professional reputation. Moreover, this case could serve as a precedent for how open records disputes involving prosecutors' offices are handled in Georgia. The clear and forceful language of Judge Krause's ruling establishes a benchmark for the expectation of compliance with transparency laws even in high-pressure and politically charged environments. It's also worth considering the potential impact on public trust in the Fulton County District Attorney's Office specifically and potentially in government institutions more broadly. When a top law enforcement official is found to have intentionally withheld public information, it can erode the public's confidence in the integrity and accountability of that office. Rebuilding that trust will likely require a demonstrable commitment to transparency and compliance with open records laws in the future. The narrative surrounding Fani Willis has become increasingly complex. She is simultaneously prosecuting a historic case with immense national significance while also facing scrutiny over her personal conduct and now her office's compliance with transparency laws. These different threads of the story are intertwined in the public consciousness and contribute to the overall perception of her leadership and the integrity of the legal processes she oversees. As American viewers, it's crucial to analyze these developments with a nuanced perspective. While the open records violation is a serious matter, it is distinct from the merits of the election interference case. It's important to avoid conflating the two and to evaluate each issue based on its own legal and factual basis. However, the finding of a lack of transparency in one area inevitably raises questions about the broader operations and culture of the district attorney's office. Looking ahead, it will be important to see how Fani Willis and her office respond to this ruling. Will they comply promptly with the order to release the documents and pay the fees? Will they issue a public statement addressing the judge's findings? Will this case lead to any changes in their internal procedures for handling open records requests? The answers to these questions will provide further insights into their commitment to transparency and accountability moving forward. One significant long-term implication could be an increased awareness and assertion of open records rights by individuals and organizations in Georgia. Judge Krause's strong stance may empower more people to file requests and to challenge denials they believe are unjustified. This could lead to greater overall transparency from government agencies across the state. Furthermore, this case could prompt legislative discussions or even reforms to Georgia's Open Records Act. If lawmakers perceive a pattern of noncompliance or if ambiguities in the current law are highlighted by this case, they might consider strengthening the legislation or clarifying the responsibilities of public agencies in responding to requests. For Fani Willis and her office, the path forward requires a clear demonstration of a renewed commitment to transparency. This would involve not only complying with Judge Krause's order but also proactively adopting practices that ensure timely and comprehensive responses to future open records requests. Failing to do so could further erode public trust and potentially lead to more legal challenges. The legal community may also engage in discussions about the ethical obligations of prosecutors regarding transparency and their duty to uphold the law in all aspects of their work, including administrative functions. This case could serve as a reminder that the pursuit of justice must be conducted with integrity and adherence to all legal requirements, not just those directly related to criminal prosecutions. From a national perspective, this story underscores the ongoing tension between the public's right to know and the desire of government agencies to control information. Open records laws are a cornerstone of democratic accountability, and their vigorous enforcement is essential for maintaining public trust. Cases like this one highlight the importance of an independent judiciary that is willing to hold powerful officials accountable for upholding these laws. It's also important for American viewers to recognize that the issue of government transparency is not partisan. Access to information about the workings of government is a fundamental right that transcends political affiliations. Whether you support or oppose Fani Willis's prosecution of the former president, the principle that public officials should be transparent and accountable is one that should be universally embraced. The details of this case, the specific records requested, the judge's strong condemnation, and the personal financial penalty serve as a compelling example of what can happen when public agencies fail to uphold their obligations under open records laws. It demonstrates that there are legal avenues for citizens and their representatives to challenge noncompliance and to seek the information they are entitled to. In conclusion, the ruling against Fani Willis for violating Georgia's Open Records Act is a significant development with potentially far-reaching implications. It serves as a reminder of the importance of government transparency, the power of open records laws, and the crucial role of the judiciary in enforcing them. While this case is distinct from the election interference prosecution, it adds another layer of complexity to the public narrative surrounding Fani Willis and her leadership. As this story continues to unfold, it will be essential for American viewers to remain informed and to consider the broader principles of accountability and transparency that are at stake. The long-term impact will depend on how Fani Willis and her office respond and whether this case catalyzes broader changes in how government agencies in Georgia and perhaps even elsewhere approach their obligations under open records laws.